Students, today we are going to deal with the topic from your Science 2 syllabus, that is animal classification. Okay. Now, before we actually start knowing more about what is classification and how is classification done, etc., I am going to ask you to do a small activity. Every day we see a variety of animals around us. Let us take a very simple example, that is, when you are in the house, you will see ants, cockroaches, sometimes house lizard. If you just go out a little, maybe crawling on soil surface, you will see earthworms. A variety of birds like parrots, crows, sparrow, they will be flying around. Dogs, cats. So, a variety of animals we see every day around us. Now, suppose I ask you to study these animals. How will you do it? Don't you think that it's very difficult to study these animals? The reason is, some animals, that is birds, they fly. Earthworm, etc., they make burrows in soil. Cockroaches, etc., they mostly prefer moist places to live. Dogs and cats, they also roam here and there. If you see a pond or a puddle nearby, you will see larvae, then tadpoles, fishes swimming in water. So, they are all aquatic, which means that, have you realized that animals live in different habitats? They are terrestrial, some are aquatic, some are aerial, they fly in air. Even in terrestrial habitat also, animals live below soil surface, some are on the ground, that is on the soil surface. So, such a great diversity. So, now studying these animals at a time is very difficult because of different characters, and that is why classification is very necessary. So, what exactly we are doing in classification? Let us understand what is classification. Now, classification is grouping of organisms based on similarities and differences. Okay, now I have written meaning of classification, that similarities and differences are taken into account. Now, I will explain this particular part by taking one example. Suppose you have few names of animals with you. Say one is parrot, other is crow, dog, and suppose cat. I have purposely taken these simple examples because you are familiar with these names and these animals. So, once I write their names, you can imagine how do they look, where do they live, etc. Now, parrot, crow, dog, cat, out of these four names, parrot and crow are birds. So, obviously, I will put parrot and crow in one group, whereas dog and cat will be placed in another group. Why I have done this? Because Parrot and crow have similarity, that is they can fly. For flying purpose they have wings. So parrot and crow I am placing together. So what I have done? I have taken into account the concept of similarity. What is the similarity between these two animals? They are aerial, they fly in air, and other characters are also similar. On the other hand, why I have placed dog and cat in a different group? Because they are different from parrot and crow. They are not birds, which means I have taken into account the concept of difference. So dog and cat will be placed in a separate group. So in short, what I want to tell you is, when classification is done, similarities and differences are taken into account and then grouping is done. Another important thing of classification is, this is a systematic method, okay, because here characteristics of organisms or animals will be taken into account and grouping will be based on it. Now, classification is useful or important in many other ways. Always remember that in a classification system, it's a scientifically based system, it's a systematic grouping of animals or organisms, plus you can study more than one organism under one group, so your study becomes more convenient or easier. Even you can also try and understand evolution path, because usually remember that the groups in the classification system which come first, they are of old or primitive organisms, and groups which come later in the system, they are evolved or complicated organisms. So this is how path of evolution or the direction of the evolution can also be studied. Even you can study interrelationship of organisms through classification. And another important thing in classification is, organisms are assigned names, that is called nomenclature. Like we follow nomenclature in everyday life because every person has got a name and surname. So with the help of name and surname, we identify or recognize a person correctly. Similarly, for living organisms also, on the basis of their characteristics, names are assigned. So for a nomenclature purpose also, classification is an important method. Okay? So that's why classification is very, very necessary when a large number of organisms are to be studied. Now students, earlier in the previous standards, you have studied two classification systems. The old system is Linnaeus system. The system was proposed by Linnaeus, or maybe in your textbooks you must have read the name Carl Linnaeus or Carolus Linnaeus. So it is Linnaeus system of classification, and this system has two groups. First group is Plantae, where all plants are included, and second group is Animalia, which includes all animals. So Linnaeus has classified organisms into kingdom Plantae and Animalia. But let me tell you that there are some drawbacks of this system. It is not perfect. There are some organisms which do not fit properly in Plantae or Animalia. So, there are limitations or drawbacks of Linnaeus system, and that is why comparatively recently a new system of classification was designed, or it was proposed by a scientist. His name is Robert Whittaker. In previous standards, you have come across this name Robert Whittaker, and briefly you have studied groups which are proposed in this system. So, Whittaker's system includes 5 kingdoms, and that is why it is 5 kingdom system of classification. So, Linnaeus proposed 2 kingdoms, whereas in Whittaker's system there are 5 kingdoms. Now, I will quickly tell you which are the names of those 5 kingdoms. The first is kingdom Monera, second is Protista, kingdom Plantae, kingdom Fungi, and kingdom Animalia. Okay, so these are 5 groups or kingdoms in Whittaker's system. Now, as per Whittaker's system, we will be dealing with the further classification. So, students, you have to remember that animals which are unicellular, for example, you are familiar with name amoeba. You also know one more name, paramecium. Now, these two are animals, but they are unicellular. That is, their body is made up of a single cell. So, these unicellular animals, as per Whittaker's system, are in Protista. So, we are not going to deal with those animals in Animalia. So, obviously, in kingdom Animalia, we will be dealing with only multicellular animals and their further classification. Okay, understood? Now, kingdom Animalia is a very big group, and that is why let us see how is kingdom Animalia further classified. So, in kingdom Animalia, there are 2 major groups. First group is non-chordates and second group is chordates. Okay, first group non-chordates, second group chordates. So, Animalia has these 2 major groups. Non-chordates come first. Remember, I told you that animals which are placed in the earlier groups, they are primitive. So, obviously, according to that rule, non-chordates are primitive animals, and comparatively chordates are advanced or evolved animals. Now, there may be a question in your mind, how to decide whether animal is non-chordate or it is chordate. So, let us see some of the important characteristics of chordates and non-chordates. In non-chordates, notochord is absent. That's why non-chordates. And exactly opposite, notochord is present in chordates. Okay, now there may be a question in your mind, what is notochord? Where is this part of the body present? So remember that, students, notochord is like a rod present in the body and it represents nervous tissue. Notochord is usually absent in primitive organisms, whereas it is present in higher animals or evolved animals. So this is the first difference. Now next point, heart if present in non-chordates, it is dorsal. Dorsal means our back side. So in non-chordates, first of all remember that all non-chordates do not have heart to pump blood or fluid. So if heart is present, it will be on dorsal side. Otherwise, heart is going to be absent in rest of the non-chordates. Whereas in chordates, now how to remember this particular point? Human beings, that is we are chordates. Where is our heart? This side, front side, correct? Now this front side is ventral side. So in chordates, heart is ventral and exactly opposite in non-chordates. Next point of difference. Pharyngeal gill slits absent. Now on the pharynx portion, that is this portion, in short it is throat portion, gill slits are absent for respiration. The animals, these non-chordates will have some other organs for respiration, and in chordates gill slits are present. Okay, another important difference, appendages, that is locomotory organs, in simple words, hands and legs. So how many appendages are present in non-chordates? 3 pairs or sometimes more. So see, cockroach. Now after this, if you happen to see a cockroach, count its legs. You will find that cockroaches have 6 legs. 6 legs means 3 pairs. And there are some larvae etc. which have large number of appendages. So that's why I have written 3 pairs of legs or appendages or sometimes even more. On the other hand, for chordates, appendages are 2 pairs. That is, maximum 4 hands or legs are present in chordates. And one more point I am going to tell you, symmetry, body symmetry. Animals could be asymmetrical or they are usually radial in symmetry, whereas bilateral symmetry is a feature of chordates. Okay. Now quickly have a look at all these points. Non-chordates, notochord is absent, notochord present in chordates. Heart, if present, it is dorsal in position, heart is on ventral side. Pharyngeal gill slits absent in non-chordates, present in chordates. Appendages 3 pairs or more in non-chordates and 2 pairs in chordates. Symmetry, asymmetrical animals, or there could be radial symmetry and bilateral symmetry in chordates. Okay. So, this is how the basic grouping or classification of animals is done in these two groups. Okay. Now, this difference is also important for you from your exam point of view. Okay. Now, let us move ahead. I have told you that non-chordates and chordates are two groups, which means classification is done? No. These two groups are including again large number of animals, and not just the number, character wise also great diversity or variety, and that is why in the classification system non-chordates and chordates are further classified into subgroups. Okay. So, now shortly we will deal with classification of non-chordates followed by chordates. Okay. Now, let us move ahead. Okay, now before moving on to actual groups of non-chordates or chordates, I am going to tell you about how is grouping done. That is called criteria of classification or basis of classification. Okay, I will give you a very simple example. Suppose in your classroom a class teacher has some activity or say some work to be done, and in the class some groups are to be made. Now, when students of the class are to be divided into some smaller groups, teacher will have to take into account certain things. Say maybe suppose let us take percentage, students percentage. So, students with higher percentage in one group, students with the moderate level of percentage, maybe they will form another group, and students with less percentage will form a third group. So, here how is classification being done? Percentage criterion is taken into account to classify or to group. Similarly, in animal classification, such criteria are taken into account and classification is done. Okay. Now, let us see which are those criteria for classification. So far students, today you have studied what is classification, why is classification necessary, two groups of animals as non-chordates and chordates, and what is the importance of classification. Okay. So, now in the next class I will be dealing with various criteria of classification.